Daniel has time for a couple of questions, if there are any. And if not, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Does your daughter have a Twitter account?
No, she doesn't.
Okay, because some of us were going to tweet her a happy birthday.
there you go.
So
Well,
please communicate
I will do that.
our best
I will do-
wishes
thank
to
you
her
very
and
much.
thank her for sharing you with
Yeah,
us.
great, yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
Jean.
Bonjour, Jean Tourigny, Public Safety Canada. You touched briefly on the new HRM standard. Can you expand on that?
The new HR, sorry?
HRM standard?
Yeah, so the Common Human Resource Business Practices is sort of the key thing that I'm referring to there, or processes, or I should say. And listen, we had over 800 systems that we were using at different points in time across the federal government on every range from launching a staffing action, for example, to, again, bringing an employee back in off disability, to any number of other things. So those processes are the things that we wanted to make sure were the same in every department. We wanted to make sure that it didn't matter if you were advising a client at Aboriginal Affairs or Western Diversification or somewhere in between, that the processes were the same, that you trained people once to do things a particular way, and that way would be valid no matter where you went across the federal public service. And that we'd actually codified those things so that people could actually go and see what the expectation is in black and white, and that the process would be mapped out. One of the great challenges I think that we have found is with the great creativity that you often find in very bright and capable people comes a exponential growth of different ways of doing the same thing. And if you're a small organization, that can be great. But when you have an organization, as you know, as large as we have in the federal public service, to suddenly have 60, 70, 200, 300 different ways of doing the same thing actually becomes very time-consuming and resource-consuming for the entire organization. And so that's what we wanted to avoid, and so that's why we've gone to the Common Human Resource Business Processes. So I hope that answers.
And one more here.
Is it on now? Yes, thank you. Thank you for that presentation. It was very interesting. For me, it was interesting also to make the link with Catherine's presentation in terms of the PeopleSoft and maybe the information that you will be able to glean from the new system. My question is particularly in terms of the tools that are available to us in situations where we have serious shortages on the side of our HR colleagues on many fronts, but especially for identifying appropriate continuous learning needs for our teams, which is the case at least for us on where I am, which is Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. Thank you.
Well, let's be clear. Labor shortages are a fact of life for us for the next generation. When I started, we were at the very tail end of the baby boom, and our systems were developed on the disposable labor theory, would be the view that I would have of it. It didn't matter if I bailed on the system because it took 2 years to get back to me, because there were enough other people at that point in time that were going to hang out through it because they didn't have any other options, and they would still be there. If you look at the time frames that it takes for us to do our hiring, that is a disincentive to any number of people. If your labor force is big enough that there are more people than anybody needs, that's not a problem. But for the foreseeable future in Canada, all sorts of different areas in the economy are going to be short people. And it's why if you go out in Western Canada at this point in time and try to find sort of pipe fitters, if you try to find engineers, if you try to find lawyers or others, you are not going to find those people. And it's not so different in other parts of the country. And so I think that, you know, for those of us who remember a period of time where it was relatively easy to find the right people, those days are gone for all of us. We are going to have to grow our own talent more than we ever had to before. It reaches into that question of ongoing learning and training. People are going to have opportunities available to them that simply weren't available to people when I started in the labor force about 25 years ago. And the ability of people, for example, to get noticed, so you come from DFAT-D, but the ability for anybody working in a basement in Nepean to get noticed in Singapore these days is completely different than it was 25 years ago. And that's because of the types of electronic communication that we have available to us. So what I would say is, if you have great staff, we are going to have to work hard to keep them in a different way than most of us had to when we started our careers. We are going to have to live with the fact that people have choices that they didn't have available to them. So if I look at the federal government, I am extraordinarily pleased with the people that we're able to attract. When I sit down with colleagues from provincial governments, I do so less with municipal governments, but I have in previous lives, I am extraordinarily pleased with the quality of people that they bring to tables, from the very junior people right up to the very senior people. But the challenges of getting them and keeping them are not unique either to the public sector or to any particular government. When I go and talk to private sector, they are having the same sets of issues. So it doesn't take away that it's a challenge. It doesn't take away that it may even be a problem in many cases. But what it does do, I think, gives us the comfort that this isn't just us. And as public sector entities, we are not going to outbid anybody. We are not going to be in a position where we can offer the types of financial and other incentives that are going to cause people to up and leave any number of other situations simply to come to us. But what we do have is you cannot find any more interesting files in Canada than you can find at any public institution. You cannot find any set of institutions, if you want to make a difference in this country, that will make more of a difference than the public institutions that you come out of. You will not find better opportunities for mentoring for people who are profoundly dedicated to what they're doing than you will find in the public institutions that we're a part of. Those are advantages that we have that I think almost nobody can match anywhere, maybe some places around the world. But when you add to that the stability that we generally have, which even if it's different than it was at different points in time in the past, is certainly very competitive with the type of stability you find outside the public sector these days, and you take into account the conditions of work and all these other things, it remains a very, very, very attractive place to be. And I think we will have to do a harder job of selling these things in the future than we've had to do in the past.
Thank you very much,
Okay,
Daniel.
well, thanks a lot, Paul.
It's good having you
Yes,
here.
yeah,
Thank you
super.
for-
Yeah, super.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stealing